AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Hey listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts podcast. Today's conversation series episode is brought to you by thecollector.com. If you're into mind-blowing dives into ancient history, philosophy, killer art breakdowns, or even epic travel spots with a cultural twist, this is the site that's got it all. Visit thecollector.com, stories to teach, inform, and inspire. Today on History Shorts, we speak with Sam Kean, the acclaimed author whose captivating books have brought science and history to life for readers around the world. From the elemental wonders in The Disappearing Spoon to the gripping tales of scientific villains in The Ice-Pick Surgeon, Sam's work masterfully blends rigorous research with storytelling flair. Today, we're diving into his latest adventure, Dinner with King Tut, an archaeological romp through the entire history of humankind. This book takes us on a sensory journey across lost civilizations, from the tombs of ancient Egypt to Polynesian islands and the Arctic ice flows, where Sam joins rogue archaeologists in resurrecting the tastes, smells, sounds, and textures of our ancestors. It's a bold exploration of experimental archaeology that challenges how we connect with the past. For past episodes in the conversation series, visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. And if you like the show, please consider becoming a monthly Patreon supporter at patreon.com/History Shorts Podcast. Enjoy today's episode.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Sam, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What sparked your interest in joining these rogue archaeologists on their sensory recreations of ancient life?
Essentially, it was frustration with what the day-to-day reality of what regular archaeology is like, because I love archaeology. I love all of the big, juicy questions it asks about human history, humankind, who we are, where we came from, how we spread across the globe, all of these big, meaty questions. But the day-to-day work of it seemed so boring to me. It was just people sitting around in the dirt with toothbrushes or dental picks, digging out pot shards. And I know how important that work is, but writing about it just seemed so tedious. So experimental archaeology gave me a way to write about it that was a lot more interesting, a lot more fun, and like you said, a lot more sensory rich. So it really allowed me to approach archaeology in a fun, interesting way. And you can learn a lot about the past through this new approach that you don't get from traditional archaeology. So it was both exciting for me, and the knowledge you gain is pretty exciting as well.
Not necessarily the Indiana Jones lifestyle when you think of archaeology normally.
Right, yeah.
So many crazy stories in this book. What would you say was the craziest story or the most memorable aspect of this research journey? And I don't want to give anything away too much, but we're talking tattoos, we're talking about eating certain things. What do you think would be the most memorable aspect of this research that will definitely stay with you?
There are a few things that stick out. There was the fun research that I got to do. I got to give someone a tattoo, which I never imagined I would be doing when I started the book. We spent a day out in Utah. This guy built a 30-foot tall catapult out there. So he spent a day flinging these giant garden stones at this wall, this palisade that he'd built. So the fun stuff stands out as well. The delicious food stands out as well. But some of the more memorable times, I think, were actually the moments when I was miserable and I was floundering around, frustrated, mad. There were flies biting me, and I was just kind of annoyed and frustrated and wanted to quit a lot of times while I was in the middle of these projects. Tanning leather turned out to be a miserable experience. I did what's called a trepanation. So it's a type of ancient surgery. I did it on a pig skull and a deer skull. You open up a hole in their skull to relieve pressure on the brain. So I tried that out, another miserable experience. But I think the emotions were part of the learning experience in that, and it really drove home what it was like for our ancestors and how difficult life was. And I think we all know generally life was probably harder way back when, but it's one thing to just sort of think about it or be aware of that. It's another thing to experience that and to go through the misery. So the emotions, I think, were an important part of the learning process and really drove a lot of that home for me.
What did these people react with when you came up to them and said, "Hey, I kind of want to do this"? Did you get a lot of really? Or were people like, "Oh, this is great. Let's do this, man"?
In a lot of cases, they were the ones who were doing the project. They were probably getting the really or the, "Are you sure you want to do this?" from their colleagues, or in the case of amateurs, from their friends and loved ones. Like, it's a little unusual to build an authentic 30-foot catapult and keep it in a field that you own and just go out there every weekend and throw these big stones around. But these people are just passionate about what they do. And so for me approaching them, they're like, "Oh, heck yeah, come on. I've been waiting to talk to somebody about my love of catapults or my love of making leather or whatever the case is." So for our relationship with me and the sources, they were very excited about it. I think it's the rest of society that looks a little askance at them sometimes.
You explore how experimental archaeology brings lost civilizations to life through the five senses, essentially. Can you give us one or maybe two examples of how these archaeologists immerse themselves in past cultures?
Yeah, trying to think of what the best example might be. Well, one example about the sort of the title story, Dinner with King Tut, involves Egyptian bread. So that was sort of the staple of the Egyptian diet was bread. And in fact, the workers who built the pyramids, this was before money existed, they were actually paid wages in bread. So very important part of not only their diet, but their society overall. And the guy I talked to for this is named Seamus Blackley. He actually invented the Xbox gaming system in a previous life. So that's like his claim to fame. But after he kind of got out of that world, he decided he wanted to learn how to make heirloom bread. So he started with medieval bread and then got interested in Egyptian bread. And one day, maybe 5, 6 years ago, whatever it was, he posted something on Twitter that said, "Hey, I made this Egyptian bread." And he got absolutely hammered online because they said it was inauthentic. You didn't do this right. You didn't do this right. And instead of getting defensive or angry about it, he said, "You know what? You're right. I did not do a good job of this. But now I'm going to reach out to my critics and I'm going to do a good job of this." So he kind of brought them on the team, had them help him out, consulted with them, and tried to make authentic bread. So he did everything from fly over to Egypt with microbiology equipment to take samples of dormant yeast on bread molds from there. He sourced authentic grain, heirloom grain. He got some acacia wood, that the type the Egyptians would have used to bake their bread. He built a fire pit in his backyard. He just went all out to make this bread. And he let me try some of it. And it was probably the best bread I've ever had in my life. It was so, so delicious. And he's a good example of someone who's not a credentialed archaeologist, but they just got really excited and enthusiastic about the project and just went to all lengths they could to try to make it as authentic as possible. So getting to meet people like that was really one of the big delights of the book.
I love the fact in that section of that chapter you speak about eating that bread, and at one point you talk about microwaving the bread, and it was interesting how you could connect the fact that you have something so old, and yet now we're making this so contemporary. And then we're gonna warm it up in a microwave. We're gonna make this exactly how it was done, thousands of years ago, and then we're gonna, put some
Toss in the microwave. Yeah.
What would you say was the most surprising or counterintuitive sensory discovery from your adventures that you just didn't expect?
Let me see. Trying to run through the senses here and see anything that stands out. Getting to eat some of the food was quite interesting. To go back to that, blubber was really a fun discovery for me. I had never had blubber before, and I was in Alaska, and someone gave me some whale blubber to try. Some walrus blubber to try. And it came in. It was basically hunks of the outer layer of a walrus. So there was the skin on the outside, looked kind of like a tire, essentially, like a blown tire. Then there was the blubber. Then there was the fat. And the skin was chewy, kind of like jerky. The fat was like a piece of meat or gristle, just very chewy, like what you would expect. But the blubber was a delight. It was like a very soggy Rice Krispie bar, is the only way I can describe the texture. Except when you bit down on it, all this oil squirted out into my mouth. I thought it was you're making faces, but I thought it was delicious.
Oh
It was
man.
it was just so rich and good and unusual. To my modern palate, it probably needed a bit of salt, but I thought it was delicious, and it definitely would have been filling for someone back then.
Couple of times throughout the book, I felt like you were kind of frustrated. So there's some, not failures per se, but I guess you encountered some little failures throughout this process. And you alluded to that a little bit at the beginning. Can you point out to one that just kind of didn't work out the way you wanted it to?
Yeah, one thing that I got a little frustrated with was, one of the big things I wanted to do when I decided to write the book, and I was thinking through things I could do, was I wanted to get out on a Polynesian ship and to just like take off over the horizon and go to the next island, navigating by the stars and the waves and the birds and all that sort of romantic stuff that I was thinking of. And I got to Palau, which is in Micronesia, similar technologies and ships. And we got there and the wind just died mysteriously for a week. And I sat there so annoyed and so frustrated watching these still treetops all around us, nothing happening. It was an awful, awful disappointment that it didn't work out. It did end up working out well for the book in that there are fictional interludes in the book. And so I'm kind of describing a day in the life of a character in each case. And the character in the chapter, her ship actually gets stranded in some doldrums on the open ocean. So it was good to sort of channel those emotions and put it into the character. So maybe it helped the story out. But personally, I was left completely frustrated. And I would still love to get back someday and actually, take off like that and do that. But I had to work with what I had there.
Yeah, it's not like you could be like, "Oh, I'll be back next week." Like, no, this is
Yeah,
a trip
exactly.
that exactly. All right, so as you recreated lives across these vastly different civilizations throughout the book, like you just alluded to with all these different characters, were there any universal human elements that stood out to you, across time, across cultures, maybe stark cultural differences that made you question assumptions about progress in human history, or things that kind of made us human, regardless of the time?
I do think there's sort of a core human nature that we can all tap into. And the characters are facing the same sorts of frustrations we do. Their frustrations in their love lives, frustrations with family members, frustrations with bosses, just basic things. Or they're, plunging out into dangerous situations, whether it's a whiteout in Alaska, being stuck on the open ocean, whatever the case may be. So I do think there really is a core sort of humanity you can draw on there. Something that did surprise me, though, was I guess I didn't appreciate how clever their tools were and how good they were for the time, in that even something like a stone blade, which you would think would be very crude and primitive, they're actually very, very good cutting tools. So getting to use some of these technologies, I was surprised at how good they were and how clever they were in what they did develop. And then the food I tried too, a lot of it was delicious. I think I had sort of this stereotype that they were probably, eating corn mush, and it was just this terrible, awful raw meat and corn mush, I think is what I thought. But they had some really delicious foods that I got to try throughout the book. And things I wouldn't have expected to like potatoes with clay sauce that I ate in South America, or like the walrus. Like I said, I never would have tried that, but it was very good. So yeah, getting to try those things and really help me appreciate how clever people were.
Looking ahead, how might these rogue methods that you highlight in your book, focusing on smells, taste, sounds, evolve with emerging technologies like AI or virtual reality, in trying to decipher the past? Or maybe what risks or opportunities do you foresee for making history more accessible to the public using newer technology?
I hadn't thought about that. The virtual reality, I could definitely see that coming in that you can make it even more immersive if you can sort of, put on the goggles or whatever and be there. Yeah, you can pump in sounds and maybe even smells and tastes and stuff like that. So I do think there's definitely an opportunity there. And I see mostly upside in doing this type of work for the relationship with the public, in that it really does bring history alive, and it makes it more visceral and memorable when you're actually doing something. I think that, you can get a fair amount of ways into learning something just by reading about it. But when you're actually immersed in experiencing it, it's just a much richer experience and it sticks with you longer.
So, Sam, what are you working on next? Are you already in the throngs of doing something new, or are you just, I need a break and eat some, burgers, American food?
Well, I mean, this book was tiring with all the travel, but it was energizing too. So I didn't feel like I had to, like take a break. And I will actually have a new book coming out roughly a year from now. It's about the greatest lost treasures in history. So that one has been fun to write.
That's awesome. Well, you also have a podcast, right? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called The Disappearing Spoon. And sort of the tagline is "When Footnotes Become the Real Story." It's essentially sort of bite sized episode stories, like 20 minutes long or so. And it's things I come across in my research that I find fascinating, that I want to give a home to, but they just didn't fit in my books. So little tangents, little fun stories that I spin, stuff like that. So it's been a lot of fun.
Last fun question. I mean, I assume you also read, I mean, I'm not sure if you have time to read books, but what do you read for fun? Are you more of a fiction guy? You're a nonfiction guy? Is there any books that you would definitely find on your bookshelf sitting somewhere in that, in your house?
Yeah, I probably read about 60% nonfiction and 40% fiction or so. So I read a fair amount of fiction. Yeah, there are some books I've read recently, or ones that I love in general. I do like Neil Stephenson. He's a science fiction guy. I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who wrote The Corner, and Homicide, basically what The Wire, the TV show, David Simon, he spun those off into The Wire, the TV show. Both of those books are phenomenal. Two of the best nonfiction books I've ever read in my life. Evicted was a powerful book that I read recently about homelessness and the housing crisis in the U.S. So I read pretty widely and just try to, grab whatever I can. And I'm a sucker for mysteries, so I always have a mystery or two that I'm thinking about reading. So everything from classics like Agatha Christie up to Tana French and stuff like that. So yeah, I try to read really widely because I never know what will turn out to be useful, and I just am kind of insatiably curious about the world. So.
Yeah, and even in this book, you have this ability of jumping from nonfiction to fiction, nonfiction to fiction. Do you have a preference of which one you kind of lose yourself more in writing?
Probably nonfiction. This is the first time I've ever published any fiction, so I was a little nervous about that. I think the stories turned out well. My editor, she does fiction and nonfiction, so she was kind of helping me, coaching me out there. So that was reassuring. Yeah, I think I just sort of naturally tend toward nonfiction, but it was nice to exercise some different muscles and try some stories out.
Yeah, definitely a lot more freedom with fiction.
Yeah, you can just invent things. I mean, that's the point. And nonfiction, it gets a little frustrating sometimes because we just don't know certain things or there's limitations. Whereas you can just wave that away in fiction and just do whatever you want.
Sam, this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me.